Academica Media. Welcome to Teach the Way They Learn, expert insight on educating all students. And now your host, Liliana Salazar.
We are back live streaming from the Florida Charter Conference, Schools Conference 2021. First, we are so happy to be seeing human beings again. Oh my gosh. I mean, I really love Zoom, but I don't. Okay. I am done with Zoom. Oh my God, I've been able to touch people and of course I ask, can I hug you? But it's just been so phenomenal. It's phenomenal to see Ross and actually be podcasting, because for like a year and a half, Ross, we've been podcasting via Zoom, and that's not really the way you should podcast. You should podcast like we're doing right now. So I'm so excited to be back. I'm so excited that Sarah and Ryan had a session so I could come and take over Academica Media for an hour and live stream from this amazing conference. And I am so happy and honored and pleased to have these two ladies right next to me that are, besides the fact that they're just amazing administrators, they've just become really good friends, and they're dear to me and to my heart. And so I'm really happy that they took some time out of their day to come and talk to me, because they are doing phenomenal and amazing work in social emotional learning in their schools. And let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen, if we need it now, social emotional learning, especially after a pandemic. So I'm going to briefly introduce their names, but they're going to give you a little bit of introduction about themselves, and then we're going to get right into the meat of what they're doing in their schools to incorporate, implement, initiate, and grow social emotional learning in their schools. So I have with me the phenomenal Idalia Suarez, and Idalia is a principal of two schools in Homestead, Florida, with our Somerset network. She's going to talk a little bit about that. And then I have the lovely Elanit Weizman, and she is an administrator in Palm Beach County, and she works for our Ben Gamla network, which is one of our smaller networks, but it's small, but it's mighty and it's powerful, and I like it. So Elanit, do you want to start off just, a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your school, and then Idalia will take over?
Sure.
Come real close.
Okay.
Yeah, right on it.
So we actually started implementing a lot of trauma-informed practices in our school several years ago, before Parkland, before the COVID pandemic. I had begun learning about ACE scores and the effect of adverse childhood experiences on children and their parents' ACE scores on what we're seeing in the classrooms. And I started looking for different opportunities for restorative practices instead of just punishment and consequences and rewards and behavior, and came across, again, a lot of different trauma-informed practices, including where we are now right now is we're focusing on positive discipline.
I'm going to stop you real quick, and I'm going to rewind, and I want you to give me a definition of trauma-informed practices and a brief description of ACEs, because not all of our listeners might know what ACEs is, and that study was groundbreaking.
Absolutely.
So talk to us a little bit, just real briefly, about what trauma-informed practices is and what ACEs captured when it came to trauma.
Okay. So the whole ACE study, like you said, was it was introduced to me actually by my brother, who's in the medical field, and he was talking about it. And I was like, well, Mike, everybody knows that, of course, what's where kids are and how they're growing up affects them in schools. He's like, no, you don't get it. It actually affects them medically. Like it's an actual medical thing where that fight, flight, or freeze.
Yes.
That cortisone, I believe it is. It gets into their systems, and as adults, you see adults that had high ACE scores that are more likely to have, even if they don't have unhealthy habits, more likely to have heart disease and all these types of illnesses. And when you look at, at the time, there's 10 main factors that they look at as far as what your ACE score is. Anything from, of course, the big ones we would think about is like physical abuse, sexual abuse, parents been imprisoned, even divorce, death of a parent.
Correct.
If you've ever heard one of your parents yelling, belittling another parent. So there's the whole list. And when you take that quiz, you get an ACE score. So
right.
So what they have found was that the higher, of course, the ACE score in the parents, the more likely that there were going to be medical issues, but then also the more likely there would be trauma with the children.
Come closer to the mic.
Okay,
yeah, because we have a lot of people talking, but yes, but it's so powerful what you're saying. I want to make sure that everyone understands what you're saying.
The more likely that you would see behaviors in the children. And of course, when you're talking about trauma and trauma-informed practices, you're looking at, children are born and there might have been like prenatal trauma, like if depending on how the mother's, how the pregnancy went. Was she excited about the baby? Is it is the family supportive, or was the baby not necessarily wanted, and is there perhaps abuse in that relationship? So even in utero there is trauma.
Can you imagine?
That is affecting the child, because whatever's happening in the mom's body at that time is of course impacting the child. So by the time they come to kindergarten, when they talk about like the first, I think it's like whatever it is, it's not 60 days obviously because they're 5 years old, so whatever number of,
right,
maybe 600, I don't do that math right now because I'll get it wrong, but there's
okay.
a certain, by the time they come there, they're already so predisposed to have possibly PTSD, or to have, they're in that fight, fright, or freeze mode,
right,
where they have very, very low levels of tolerance. Whereas they come to kindergarten, and there's actually, it's an incredible book called Help for Billy, which if any of you guys have.
Help for Billy?
Help for Billy.
Okay, I want to
really
put that.
Talks about.
We need to look at that for a book study.
It's an amazing
Help for
book,
Billy.
and I cannot remember the name of the author right
now.
No
problems. We'll look it up.
I actually did, after reading the book, I did attend a trauma-informed conference several years ago, in which she spoke, and I believe it's called Beyond Consequences. And the idea is that in this book, you have, two children, Billy with an A, Billy with a Y, Billy with an IE, like your boy and your girl, let's say, so it would be, either way. And, one child comes to kindergarten, they've had X, Y, or Z experiences. They have a normal size window of tolerance, a typical size.
Correct.
Then you have your other student A or student B, who, of course, the whole experience up until they're 5 years old has been very, very different. So now they come in, and it's not just an academic inequity. There's actually just in general, like a door slams. One child is like, oh, it's a slam door. Another one's like, it now becomes afraid.
Right.
And what was that? And they're the ones who are acting out. And a lot of the behaviors that we see in young children, and really in any children, now we know, we can understand they just went through a pandemic, sure, but even if that wasn't the case, it's a self-regulation issue, not I'm choosing to be defiant and disruptive and throw furniture or be a terror to the class or to the teacher. They don't have the self-regulation
right.
strategies that they need to be able to essentially to self-regulate and to know how to respond in times of stress. And
Elanit,
yes.
I wanna interrupt there, because we're so quick to say this kid can't learn, or this kid must have a disability, right? And it could be. I'm not saying it can't, right? But wow, look at everything that you just described that could be happening or is happening in the lives of the children that are coming to our schools. And if we don't capture all of that, we can really jump to some really, really, wrong assumptions and conclusions. I know that, Idalia, you work, this is your life's passion as well. You're very involved with trauma-informed practices. Do you want to piggyback a little bit on what Elanit has been saying as well, and what you're doing in your school?
Absolutely. Let me move this here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
there we go.
You're good.
So, for actually quite a few years, I was a fan of Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective Person. And a few years ago, I want to say about 4 years ago, I ran into a program. It's evidence-based. It's CASEL approved.
Mm-hmm.
And
very important.
Very important.
CASEL. Please only use things that are CASEL approved, because that means they are evidence-based and the science works.
It does. It works. And the research supports it. And I'm seeing the fruits of our efforts and labor, and really bringing this process. It's not even a program when we talk about Leader in Me, because Stephen Covey says that everyone has genius. And to me, that's a very powerful statement.
Correct.
Because when you hear everyone has genius, is that everyone has the power to be successful. And what we do is help students find their own capacity of leadership. And we do that through soft skills. And, I know that's a term that's been thrown around the last couple of years, 21st century skills, soft skills, and they're essential. You talked something about like human connection.
Yeah.
Human connection is very important, but we have lost,
We have.
how to communicate, how to problem solve, and to synergize together. So what I've seen is, the leader in me starts with the leader and the teachers, and the staff. We train them in the 7 habits.
Okay.
Work on the adults in the building first, because it's through those adults that we're going to be able to start modeling the 7 habits and really exposing the students. But then another important component is, as we teach the 7 habits, we allow students to practice, and I think that we as adults assume that everyone has the capability of practicing these habits, and they don't, and we don't allow.
Which goes to what Elanit was saying, right? Because we don't know their backgrounds. We don't know what has happened in their lives, right?
Right, exactly. And if we allow the students a safe space without ridicule or judgment, to be able to practice these soft skills, they're going to make mistakes. Children
Right.
make mistakes, but growth mindset, we know that we learn from failure, from mistakes. Sometimes the mistakes are big, but everybody needs to have an opportunity to grow and to learn from them. But what the habits allow, and this the leader in me allows us to keep a very, begin with the end in mind. We have a goal, we have a mission. The mission is that everybody is a leader, everyone has genius. We help them find that capacity, and we give them the opportunity to practice these habits, not just socially, but also in their journey as scholars of the school. And I've seen a huge impact in our school, and a transition, but it's a crock pot. It's slow.
Slow.
It's not going to be a quick fix. And, we took a little bit of a sidestep. I'm not going to say we took a step back. I think we took more of a sidestep because of the pandemic, but we need to double our efforts, and because the evidence is there, the research is there, I really back it up, and it's, non-negotiable. And it is a foundation of our schools. The academics are important, but that SEL component is the foundation, so that students can grow themselves.
Elanit, tell me a little bit about what you're doing in your school when it comes to social emotional learning.
Sure. So again, like that understanding that whole child perspective is so critical. We actually, the program or the system that I had found a few years ago when I was looking, I would say found, but it was more like reintroduced, is it's called Positive Discipline.
Yes.
And it's actually based on the work of Jane Nelson, and in the classroom it goes to Lynn Lott. They wrote the book together in the Positive Discipline in the classroom and in school settings, which is actually then further based on Adlerian principles of those relationships and connection building. And there's just so many tools that we use, and of course it begins with training the teachers. And we've brought trainers in, and we have sent teachers to trainings. I've been to multiple conferences and trainings, and it does start with that whole setup of course, mistakes, opportunities to learn. That's one of the foundational principles of positive discipline. And really, what it starts with is when we meet with the teachers, the very first things that you do, or even like in the parent workshops, I've led a few parent workshops as well with this, is you start like, okay, what are the challenges that we're facing, whether it be in the classroom or at home?
Good.
And then you look at what are our hopes, or when we meet this child in 20 years, what are the skills or that we hope they're going to have? And then of course, you come up with independence and resilience and empathy and kindness and, possibly, the ability to be independent. So at some point the academics or profession needs to get in there as well. And then we look at, so what are maybe the typical ways that we address these behaviors, these challenges when we see them? Is the child learning any of these skills by this consequence, by lunch detention or by a punishment, or is this teaching them to become independent? Is this teaching them the value of responsibility or whatever it might be? So rather
say that one more time, because that's very powerful.
So
because as educators and as administrators, a former administrator, it can be very quick to jump suspension,
quick time,
detention.
quick fix.
I mean, it's quick, and sometimes
it
is needed,
and sometimes it's needed, and sometimes it works temporarily,
and something right,
but it's not solving the root. It
there
get
you go.
To the root.
That's what I want you to say that again. Yeah.
So like you can punish and you can yell and you can do all these things, and lots of, unfortunately, parents and educators
Yeah.
use blame or shame in their way of managing inappropriate or antisocial, if you will, in a classroom behaviors. And it sometimes works and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it actually backfires. But what happens is, even if it works temporarily, you're not actually addressing the root of the behavior, or teaching alternate behaviors, or teaching skills, like new skills. So one of the things that we look at, and when we talk with teachers, and there's even whole systems in place for them to be able to support each other, is what's the belief behind the behavior. So, and how does the teacher or the adult in the situation feel based on what the child is doing? If it's making you feel annoyed or irritated, perhaps the belief behind the behavior or the misguided goal, unconscious or subconscious goal, of course, is undue attention. Or if it's making you feel like challenged and like mad, then maybe it's, it's a power, it's undue power. So when you understand what, perhaps, without trying to figure out why the child is doing it, you kind of go on it based on how's it making you feel,
Right.
and how are you responding, and then how could you respond in a way that actually was more, aligned with the ideas of teaching different ways, and helping children themselves to be problem solvers. And ultimately, the goal is that they become their own problem solvers. And of course, there's a teaching component where we have to actually teach them the strategies. And in our school, for example, they're built into their schedule. We actually extended our day a few years ago to be able to accommodate this. Is an actual, 20 to 30 minutes, depending on the grade level, of a community meeting where there's a specific agenda or format that they follow. And eventually the teacher is teaching skills. And then it eventually comes to the point of where, even in kindergarten, they become problem solvers. Like, they bring a problem to the agenda, they discuss it, they look at solutions, they choose a solution, they try to work out the solution. And like you said, of course, in the last year and a half, there's been a bit of a sidestep. I like that, instead of it's not as much a back step, but a sidestep.
I like the sidestep too.
But definitely a sidestep, and definitely different behaviors have increased. And I think if ever the window of tolerance, was there, it for sure is decreased. And new behaviors need to be, or new interaction skills need to be retaught, to students. So it's definitely, we're all, I'm sure, seeing challenges, and this is an opportunity for us to really address the children where they are, and just to work with them. And
Idalia, I'm hearing, because there is a one of the 7 habits that you're always telling me that has to do with what she just said. So I want you to talk about that 7th habit.
The 7th habit?
Yeah, there's one of the habits that you're when we're in trainings, it says that it must start with me first before it. Which is the one that you always say?
Well, it's not a habit per se. It's part of, like, the preface of the foundation of the 7 habits. But change begins with me.
Yes, change begins. You always say that. And when I was listening with Elanit, I'm like, what is it that Idalia is always telling me? Change begins with me, right?
and I always tell the teachers, as well as the staff and students, is that everybody has a key to the door, but it's in the inside. Meaning, we cannot control when somebody's ready to open the door. But
I love that.
I always, what I share with my staff is, we're planting a seed and we're watering it, and we don't know when it's going to start to germinate. It might be much later in life that they grow, but every time we water and we allow these students to reflect and have these conversations. And I want to piggyback, because something else we do with the Leader in Me, we too have a block. Once a week, they have their Leader in Me block, which is their time to, they explicitly teach the habits. We have the curriculum to follow, but it also engages in conversations. Because sometimes teachers want to have these conversations, but they need a guide.
Yeah.
Because this is very abstract. So we created that space. And in the same thing in middle school, we have a leadership class. But it's important to give them the space, the time to, really learn these habits, and then give them the space to, like, practice them and give them time.
So as our closing, as current peoples in practicing during a pandemic, you just quickly tell teachers and administrators, why is it important to have social emotional learning in your schools? Why should we have a component of social emotional learning in your schools as we close? Elanit?
there's no way that we can possibly teach any of the academic skills, reading, math, anything, if the children themselves aren't in a place where they're ready to learn.
There you go.
And we talk about that in our morning announcements every single day. We take our 3 collective breaths, we set an intention for the day, and I tell them, without the first one of respecting each other, responsibility, all of you're not going to be able to learn math or reading, certainly not to the best of your ability.
So you're almost like spinning your wheels if you don't get that social emotional component stabilized.
And you have to take time for the training. You have to take time to teach the skills, to review the skills, to model the skills, to practice the skills, to not just in the block, but at the playground. We don't just solve their problems. Okay, what could you do right now? What are your choices? Look at the wheel of choice. What are some, what strategies have you learned? I had I don't want to tell the story because we're short on time.
Yeah, we're short on time. and Idalia?
So I always go back to the theorist Maslow, hierarchy of needs.
Absolutely.
We cannot reach the level where a student is ready to learn if we don't meet their basic needs.
Right.
And SEL is a part that helps build that. And the one thing I would say, all educators, especially now, we need to have patience and we need to forgive. We're all making mistakes.
Yeah.
We're learning how to, be again in society with others, and we're all making mistakes, including the adults. So we need to give ourselves grace. We need to forgive, and we need to forget too.
Yeah.
You need to turn the page and not hold a grudge on these kids because we're not helping the situation.
Thank you so much, ladies. And I want to end by saying that very important teachers, educators, and principals, take care of yourselves as well. Find that SEL for you. That could be yoga, that could be mindfulness, that could be going shopping and just walking around and looking at things that you want to get, but taking a walk with your dog, find, some type of healthy activity, reading a book, getting a facial done, getting a mani-pedi, running, whatever the case may be. But please, educators and principals, take care of yourselves, because if your mental health is not in check and is not in place, there is no way that you can lead your school and there is no way that you can educate. Thank you, ladies, so much for coming and being here and just talking a little bit about this. I know that we just got to the tip of the iceberg, and we know that when we look at an iceberg, we know that underwater icebergs are like an enormous amount of size. But I do hope that at least it gives a taste to who's listening to make sure that they are infusing some type of SEL into their classrooms and into their schools. Thank you, ladies.
No, and thank you for having us.
And thank you, everyone, for listening in. And I'm going to pass the light back over to Ryan Corella, our phenomenal leader in charge of Academica Media. Thank you to all of the listeners for listening into our live stream. And I look forward to hearing from all of you guys and via reviews. When you listen to Teach the Way They Learn and you like it, please leave a review, because that's the way that we can get more listeners on. Share the podcast when you listen to it as well, and contact us. Let us know what you want to be hearing through Academica Media. Thank you. Have a wonderful day and a blessed weekend.
The views expressed on the preceding program have been those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of Academica, its clients, staff, affiliates, or advertisers.